Comes on. Get on, finish.
Hello everybody, Coach Tom here. Today we're going to have a look at a breakdown of the techniques and thoughts of mine of a recent super fight grappling match I had. The match fortunately went my way. You'll see how in a moment, and you'll also get an insight into not only the techniques I used, but also the thinking and planning processes involved. So although you may learn these techniques and be able to apply them today or tomorrow in your own grappling, you can also get an insight into perhaps someone who's more experienced than you on the mats, how they think, how they plan, how they deal with things that go wrong, and how you can turn what can be bad situations into good situations and make sure that you come out on top every time. So with that said, let's get started, and let's start from the beginning of the match. Okay guys, so obviously the match started from our feet, and because neither of us pull guard, we started with a typical stand-in wrestler style clinch, okay? So as we were walking around the mat, eventually my opponent grabbed a right collar tie on me. This can lead to a lot of things. I chose to move into one of my favorite stand-in grappling control positions, which is a Russian 2-on-1. So my right hand's going to come up here and cup his right forearm, okay? I am now going to bring my other hand through under his tricep, and now I'm going to roll my left shoulder on top of his wrist as I fade my head away. So the end result of this, so right hand first, left hand, I roll my shoulder as I fade my head away, and I now have the Russian 2-on-1. So if we look at that at some real speed, he grabs 1, 2, 3, and we're here in a fantastic standing grappling control position called the Russian 2-on-1. Okay, so moving on, after I had successfully got my Russian tie, my opponent very cleverly tried to take advantage of my posture. Because I had to weight his arm to keep him controlled, he has tried to jump in for a guillotine. So he's come here and wrapped the guillotine. Fortunately, because I had control of the Russian 2-on-1, this really put him in a compromised position, because he could not get his hands together, so I relinquished the grip on my right hand and I went outside to his right knee. However, so that my posture wasn't compromised, I've stepped in as I've grabbed. So now that I'm underneath him, I can lift and go for my takedown, okay? Which is exactly the position we ended up in. So one more time. I've moved to my Russian 2-on-1. He has jumped over for a guillotine. So I have kept my grip with my left hand as I step in and grab the knee, and I'm in perfect posture to execute my takedown, and we're going to land in half guard. At this point, he has now tried to lock his hands together, so we'll move on in how I dealt with this half guard guillotine and of course got out. And so here we are in half guard. Of course, my partner, being known for having good chokes, has me in a guillotine attempt. So as soon as my head's in a guillotine, I have two primary objectives I want to achieve. My first one is going to be to put my left arm over his back here. I want to get as tight and as deep as I can, which is going to stop his posture from being able to use his back and finish me with sheer strength. So I've come all the way over, and I've now had to do step 2, which is my chin turning into his ribs. Because if I stay here, my trachea is at risk of getting choked. Okay, so I'm going to hold tight and rotate my chin in. So now when he goes to finish me with that choke, I'm only feeling slight pressure on one of my carotid arteries. And that is not going to be enough to put me to sleep anytime soon. Fortunately, because I had a Russian 2-on-1 at the start, he never got that guillotine cinch very tight. So the first two things that I must do is, as he's come up, I've wrapped my left arm over and I've turned my chin into his ribs. This has meant that he is now using his strength to hold himself stationary while I've survived the choke and he's bearing my weight. However, we also now need to have a look at what I was doing to stop his right arm here from lifting up and potentially cinching in this choke. So if we switch positions, one of my key guillotine defenses that I like is when I'm being guillotined here and we lie down, I'm going to stop this arm from pulling up using the inside of my left thigh here, like this. So as he goes to apply the choke, normally he lifts up, okay? So to stop that, I'm stepping and I'm clamping. This, if he goes to apply the choke now, no, very different. We really turn it into a back exercise, from a back exercise into like a bicep curl. Now this is very different levels of strength here, and as a little tip that people often don't do when defending guillotines, however, is an effortless, free way to use gravity and big muscles to stop small muscles trying to choke your neck. So, once I knew that I was safe in the guillotine half guard attempt, I then wanted to start putting pressure on my opponent. One of the oldest principles I learned in jiu-jitsu was to cook the fight, which was just an old Machado saying that really is about if you can take the gas and wind and strength and hope out of your opponent, he or she are going to be much easier to deal with. So I did that by what's commonly referred to as a von Fleur choke, which was named after Jason von Fleur, who was a contestant on The Ultimate Fighter Season 2. So this is a very simple choke, and although I don't use it for the finish much because experienced individuals will tend to see it coming and they do not like to tap to it, it's a great way to make sure that they start feeling like you are in control. So once I was here, I've got my far knee policing, so there's no choke, my chin is in. I'm going to now drive my left shoulder down into his neck as hard as I can. Now, this pressure, sorry about that, Peter. This pressure is intense and it will make people tap. But if it doesn't make them tap, you bet as sure as hell that they are going not to be thinking aggressively about finishing you. This is a very much something you can do to drain the hope out of your partner so they want to give up on the choke. But you'll notice with the von Fleur choke that as he grabs me here, I have my left arm over, which is cutting off his carotid artery there, and I've trapped his hand in. So even if he wanted to tap, it can be hard for him to tap, but he now says, I want to let this go. I want to let this go. And this is a wonderful way that we can ensure that what we were on the defense, now we're on the offensive. And this is a great way to win the battle of a match in the mind of your partner and start making them think that they are backpedaling and you are advancing and attacking. And you'll see that the fight took a big turn at this point, and we're going to have a look at that now. So, after we'd applied that von Fleur pressure, my opponent in the match knew that he had to let go and start working for other things. Otherwise, eventually, he'd be tapping to me to the choke. So what we saw was my opponent using his right hand on my left leg to try to put me from a half guard to a full guard. Now, this would have accomplished two things for my partner. One would have been that the von Fleur pressure would have been greatly minimized to the point no doubt he could survive. But two, certainly the one I'm more worried about, is then he could have really applied that guillotine and potentially finished me like that. So what we have a look at doing here is I put so much pressure through that von Fleur choke that he then abandoned his choke temporarily with his right hand to push at my knee. At that time, I was very close to being put back into full guard, but because I could feel him let go and push at my knee, I simply then played the exact same game, tit for tat, and I put my left hand on his right knee and stepped over. And this process repeated itself a couple of times until he knew that he was not going to put me back in that guard, and then I could get busy passing. So if I'm here with Peter, I'm being held in a guillotine choke on this side, and I'm putting pressure, but so much pressure that then he releases his right hand to post on my left knee. And he now wants to try to put me back into guard, like this. And if he did that, I would have been in a lot of trouble. So, as soon as I felt him let go and post on my knee, I then posted on his knee. So as he brought his knee through, I simply stepped over it and deepened my control and pressure. So I simply not only countered his maneuver of trying to put me back into guard, which is very easy to stop with a good structure. You'll notice my left hand is very straight and structured. It also allowed me to cinch and inch my pressure up so that that pressure on his neck was even greater. So one more time, we're here like this, and we have our pressure on, and he goes to push, so I have pushed back. And when he got close to getting it back, I had to do a big step over, okay? But it was no problem doing that step because my head was so low that my hips could go high easily, okay? And now we move on and things start getting really interesting. All right, so I've managed to keep my top half guard position. I've got incredible pressure through his neck on that von Fleur choke. And so now, of course, he knows that eventually he's going to be stalemated or passed. So he's going to go for one big roll, okay? This is very typical, especially when playing top half guard, where people thinking that they're about to get passed are going to make a big rolling attempt. As long as you're ready for this, it's very easy to react because at the end of the day, you have your body weight on them. And fortunately for me, because I had such a heavy crossface with my left arm, there was never going to be an impressive explosion, as explosive as my opponent was and is. I knew that with my 80 kilos or 183 odd pounds through his neck, I knew that I was going to be able to hold him there, and if he exploded, it would be mitigated by my body weight and the control in his jaw. So let's have a look at that position. So we're here, and my opponent here has me, and I have my pressure, and he's going to go for his big roll towards this direction. So as he went for his big roll here, it was very easy for me to just jump up to my feet and then bring my right knee past his thighs. So as he had me here, when he goes for the big bridge, his feet have to come to the mat. And when they do, that lateral squeeze between his thighs has now lessened. So as soon as he goes for his big roll, I balance and I bring my right knee up. This was a crucial stage of the match that once we got here, you see the tide really was turned. So, once my knee had been freed, and it was past his thigh line here, I now could use this knee to pressure up and now push at his shoulder and simply get my head out, okay? This is a very easy process, but unless I had my knee up here, it would be all on my back and neck. I did not want that. I wanted my knee on his lower abdomen so that I could simply press away. And it's a really effortless thing to do, much easier than getting your head out of a normal guillotine, I assure you. Once I had my head free, I was now open for my pass. And the pass that I was set up for is a knee slice pass. So, because we were in no gi, I got an underhook, I stood up on my left foot, and I passed my right knee across. I made sure to push my hips into him, and now I secured a underhook on crossface on his head. I've got my underhook on the far side and I have my hands together, and I'm now going to put tremendous pressure on his jaw again, as well as bringing my knees nice and high, making sure I control my side control position. You will see at times from this side control position, I chose to lay my right leg flat, which was all about keeping weight on his near hip. So while my knee is doing a great job of blocking here, sometimes opponents, especially explosive wriggly opponents like the one that I had in that match, they can really start to figure out your problems. So one of my priorities once I got to this dominant side control position was to mix it up. And how I did that was taking my right knee here, I kick it back, which made my right hip weight lay on his. So from that position, that is now extremely hard for him to start escaping, although I started the position from here, okay? So again, once my knee was free, I put my head out, and I got my underhook, and I knee sliced past. And I've come to a dominant side control position. Heavy pressure, making sure my shoulder was in his jaw, I had my underhook, and I have all of my weight on my punch.
Comes on.
Alrighty, so we are now in our side control position. My opponent knows that he's not escaping anytime soon, so it's now time for me to improve my position. One of the biggest things that separates advanced from inexperienced practitioners in grappling and jiu-jitsu is what is a good position? How good is good, okay? When I'm in side control here, if I'm in dominant control and he can't escape, that's good. But it would be even better if he was even more vulnerable to submissions and had less of a chance to escape. So from side control, that means acquiring this real estate under his near armpit. I already had the valuable real estate under his far armpit with my underhook on my right hand here, and I have the crossface. Again, incredibly valuable real estate. So I've taken 2 out of 3 of the valuable real estate goals, and I now need to take this one. And I did it very simply. With enough pressure, people will have a tendency to raise this elbow with enough pressure. So, as soon as I felt that raise slightly, I brought my left knee in here and I've got under this arm to make sure his arm is cleared out. So I've got tremendous pressure and now I brought my hip and knee underneath this arm. Okay, so again, I'm here in side control position. I put tremendous pressure and then I just get my knee and hip under his close armpit, and now I have him locked away in a very dominant, tight side control position where I'm not vulnerable to rolls and he sure as heck is vulnerable to a submission, which we're looking at next. All right, so we have now under his arm, which I had to get and re-get several times, okay? People know that this is bad. However, if you keep insisting, they will let you have it. So after a while, when I went to get under this armpit, I decided to switch my base. This was specifically set up for my next attack, which we'll see in a moment. So I'm here like this, and I'm now gonna bring my right knee underneath this armpit here. Okay, so by bringing my right knee under, I achieve the same, I apologize, I achieve the same valuable real estate goals here of getting inside this space, but I'm simply doing it with my opposite leg. He was getting slightly savvy to my left thigh, getting into that real estate, and being a taller guy, it can be harder for me to keep that real estate because my long limbs create large gaps. However, my right thigh could slide under easy, okay? I specifically wanted to get my right thigh under because I know my particular opponent in that match loves underhook escapes. So I needed to be ready here. If Peter got an underhook on me, then I could go straight to a Kezigatami headlock control position, of which I was confident that I could finish the fight and of course prevent my opponent from escaping. However, because he did not take that bait, I had to move on to my own attack. But everything, both setting up for a Kezigatami plan to ensure my position and also setting up my next attack, was set up from switching my base and getting my right thigh underneath his arm into this real estate of his armpit here, and once he was here, I knew that the attack was coming. And so my first attack, my first attempt at finishing this match follows right now. So, from this compromised position that my opponent has found himself in, I wanted to go for one of my favorite opening attacks, and it's simply the step over switch base armbar. This is an armbar that I was taught like many years ago, and while I initially found I struggled with it, especially with my body type, I found that it would set up submissions like crazy. So I always like to go for it as a first port of call. So from this position, my goal was to bring my left hand on the other side of his head and now bring my left foot over, nice and tight. From this position, I now went for my finish. So that was all about rolling my left arm back here, pinching it tight, and then extending my hips for the finish. Okay, this is normally an incredibly high percentage submission, especially once you start practicing. However, it is one of those positions where, as the person applying it, you have to be a little bit judicious with your force. Now, I'm not talking about from an injury point of view. In a competition match, unfortunately, injury prevention is up to your partner. However, it was because if you do it and you create too much space or you go too hard, if it fails, you can often lose position. So when I locked it in, everything felt great. I started going for it, and then his arm slipped out. And that's what we're gonna go on to next. But that was jolly tight, I tell you, before he slipped out. But he slipped out and I had to deal with it. And that's what we're talking about next. So, from this position, I've gone for my step over switch base armbar and he has pulled out of that armbar. So I've kept control of his arm with my left arm. I'm not willing to let go and go back to where we were. I am constantly advancing. From this point, now that I had control of this arm, I decided to set up my favorite Kimura Attack. So to do that, I now need to come off my right hip and come up to my near knee. At this point in time, fearing an armbar on this side, which could be done like this, my opponent took the bait that I like to give. And that bait is thinking the armbar's coming, because I've got this arm tight, they seek to get under the top leg, which is an excellent escape from the armbar, because if I were to go for an armbar, he pushes the top leg up, and now he can come up and escape, and I can really go from a position where I was attacking, and now I'm the guy on my back with his guard passed. So, although this is a bait, a trap, it's very hard to resist. People always tend to go for it, and that's what he did. So let's have a look where we ended up. So I've gone for my step over armbar here, and he's pulled his arm out, but I've maintained control of it tight. I've come up to my knee, at which point he has put his arm through to try to push off my leg. I have now trapped that knee down to the ground, meaning that his hands cannot grip. I've instantly thread my right hand in, and now I've locked up my Kimura. Okay? However, before we go on to the Kimura Finish, it's important to realize if he didn't take my bait, what would I have done? Because that was a real variable that I could not control. I could not force him to take that. So, once I was here, I've moved up. If he didn't take this bait, if he did not put his hand through like this and he left it here protecting, I would have dropped my left knee over his bicep here, letting me attack the Kimura again. In case he gripped, I would be able to pull away, because this arm here is isolated with my shin cutting right into his bicep. So if he didn't take the bait, so if he went under like he did in the match, okay, I can trap. And he is in big trouble here, as we found out. However, if he did not take the bait, which you must presume, I would have dropped my left knee through so I can come up for my Kimura on this side. Okay, so either way I wanted to pin that arm, but I would much prefer, but instead of pinning it from my shin onto his bicep, which works, that's very common, I would much prefer it gets pinned between my calf and my hamstring. Certainly not as painful for him, but much more secure.
Get on, finish.
So here we are in the kill position that finished the match. Let's have a look at how it went down. First thing I'm going to do is make sure I pull up his elbow to create space for my right hand to go underneath. Okay, I want to get this part of my forearm deep in his armpit as my fulcrum, and now I'm going to simply lock up my Kimura. Okay, it's very important that you don't let it go and start grabbing like this. If you watch, I lift, wrap, and grab. I never gave Peter, or in this case my opponent Johnny, I never gave him a chance to grab at his hands like this. That was never on the cards. So I went from here, 1 and 2. Once I have my thumbless Kimura with my wrists very much rolled, I'm now ready to go for the Kimura. However, if I just try to do it here, I might not have the strength. He's a very strong man who I had to fight. So I've come up and I've kept it close to my body, and I'm going to put it down behind his back, and I'm not doing it with my arms. I'm going to do it with my body. So my head's going to come down until he has to tap. So let's look at this from another angle now, if we spin around. So this time, I've trapped this arm, and I'm here. So I switch, and I lock. My hands are bent. I've now instantly gone to apply this before he can start grabbing at his hands or maybe my pants, we never know. So I have pulled it up and out and over, and now because this would just be my arms, I'm going to keep my body flowing with it. So my head's going to come down as I put this down for the tap. This comes on extremely strongly. The reason I like to set up my Kimuras like this is I like to use my femur here as a basis for his shoulder. So there's no wiggle room at all, which means an easy tap and a powerful break if he doesn't tap. In my case in that match, the arm went all the way through and did quite a few crunches, crackles and pops. So while I hope my opponent's all right, he's a really nice guy, there was consequences of him letting his arm go that far. Although after the match, he did say to me that he normally never taps in Kimuras. He's very flexible, very strong guy, but it doesn't matter if you're big, strong, flexible, skinny, doesn't matter. This Kimura works. So from this angle, I've switched from my left hand to my right, I lock up my Kimura, and now it's time to go for the kill. So up and over, and my head comes down, and he's forced to tap quick, smart. And that's how the match went down. So there you have it, folks. A simple 2-minute, very short match. And although everything didn't go my way and he did put up a fantastic fight, he's certainly an excellent jiu-jitsu competitor, you can see that with a little bit of preparation, some good proper body positioning and awareness of what could go wrong and when and how you would mitigate and deal with it can lead to what appears to be a very one-sided seamless victory, and really that had nothing to do with physicality. The guy's hyper strong, hyper athletic. However, with some sound thinking and a little bit of wisdom and methodology behind your rolling, you can bring very predictable outcomes even when your opponent is a very athletic, skilled opponent, like I had the privilege of facing at that recent super fight event. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this, guys, and I hope you've picked up a few tips and tricks that you can use in rolling, and also see how thought processes play out with grapplers facing each other at a high level, because it certainly is like chess. The best players may know more moves. However, almost certainly they're aware of what moves you are about to do and what they can do about it. And that's why people say jiu-jitsu is like chess. So let's think about it a bit like chess, because you can see a concrete example of chess-like strategy working to achieve a predictable outcome out of chaos, which grappling is, especially fights. Thanks very much for watching, guys. I'm Coach Tom. I'll see you next time.